Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit up to $250. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back, all from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing.
Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the TimeformUS preview of the 146th Preakness Stakes, which will take place this Saturday at Pimlico. As is the tradition, this race is taking place 2 weeks after the Kentucky Derby, and what a 2 weeks it's been, as we've had a lot of news come out since Medina Spirit crossed the wire first at Churchill Downs on the first Saturday in May. Obviously, that news broke about him testing positive for that banned substance, betamethasone. Bob Baffert has offered up some excuses for why that was the case. I think at this point in time, we still don't have the full story. Not sure we're ever going to get the full story of what happened. What is clear is that Medina Spirit's Kentucky Derby win is definitely in serious jeopardy. He will not be disqualified from that race if he is indeed disqualified for a number of weeks or months after this Preakness is run. But nevertheless, in horse racing, the race will take place and the show must go on. So let's take a look at this 10-horse field for the Preakness Stakes at Pimlico on Saturday. And Medina Spirit is in the starting gate for this one. He's listed at 9-5 on the morning line. Bob Baffert actually has two runners in this race, as he also has the second choice on the morning line, the number 10 Concert Tour, who's listed at 5-2. Also single digits on the morning line is the number 5 Midnight Bourbon, who finished 6th in the Kentucky Derby. Not too many horses coming out of the Kentucky Derby to run in this Preakness, so we do have plenty of those so-called new shooters in the field. Before we get to the contenders, let's take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector for this race. And unsurprisingly, the two Bob Baffert runners are shown out towards the front end. Those are the number 3 Medina Spirit and the number 10 Concert Tour. Both of these horses have very similar running styles. Medina Spirit's done his best work on the front end, as has Concert Tour. So something's going to have to give on the front end. The pace projector is not predicting a fast pace or any kind of characterization favoring a particular running style, but the jockeys on these two horses are both very experienced. John Velasquez on Medina Spirit and Mike Smith on Concert Tour. So they're going to have to jockey for position in the early going. And I would imagine that given that Medina Spirit's drawn inside, Velasquez will have to be as aggressive as he was in the Kentucky Derby. But we'll see what Concert Tour does if these two go at it on the front end. And maybe that sets it up for a closer. Depends on how likely you think that is. Let's move on to the contenders in this race. And I think we do have to begin the conversation with that Kentucky Derby winner, Medina Spirit, or at least the horse that crossed the wire first in the Kentucky Derby. Look, he ran really well that day. He put in a gutsy performance. He set a legitimate pace on the front end. Sure, some of the other speeds didn't apply as much pressure as they arguably could have. A horse that was likely to be in front, Rock Your World, didn't get out of the gate. But those things do happen in the Kentucky Derby, and it all worked out for Medina Spirit. He still had every right to give it up in the stretch, and he just refused to let anybody past him. There were 3 horses breathing down his neck for the entirety of the final quarter mile of that race, and he just fended them off really gamely as they came to the wire. Now, he's got to do it again in 2 weeks. And obviously, we have that news about him testing positive for that substance, that therapeutic medication that is not allowed at any threshold in Kentucky. He tested positive for 21 picograms per milliliter of his blood sample. So make of that what you will. Personally, from a handicapping standpoint, I think you kind of have to put aside the emotions if you're really invested in wagering on this race and just look at it from an analytical standpoint. And it's unlikely that that positive test, whatever the reason was for it, whether it was the ointment or whether there was some injection, who knows, it probably didn't have that much of an effect on Medina Spirit's performance because this horse had run similarly well in most of his prior starts. Arguably, he did improve in the Derby a little bit, but it's not like he was some huge surprise in that race. And obviously, I'm saying that as somebody who picked him at 12-1 in that spot, but there were definitely things to like about Medina Spirit. The real question is, what are we going to get from him coming back in 2 weeks after all of this controversy has surfaced? Well, if you look at Bob Baffert's record, he has an excellent history of getting the Derby winners to run well in the Preakness. He's had 6 prior Kentucky Derby winners before Medina Spirit, and the only one that didn't win the Preakness was Authentic, who was competing in that unusual Triple Crown last year in 2020 when the pandemic caused the Preakness to be the last race in the sequence. So if you don't count that, Bob Baffert's 5 for 5 with his Preakness winners winning a traditional, with his Derby winners, I should say, winning a traditional Preakness in that Triple Crown 2 weeks later. So we'll see what we get from Medina Spirit here. My big problem is he's going to be the favorite this time. I liked him last time at a price, so I don't see the value in taking him at a much shorter price in this race. Moving on to the number 10 Concert Tour, the other Bob Baffert runner. I'm not sure what to make of his presence in this race. Bob Baffert keeps saying that the owners want to run. I don't think he said at any point that he really wants to run this horse in the Preakness, as like he thinks that this is a true mile and 3/16 horse. Personally, I have my doubts that Concert Tour wants to go this far, and not a lot of those doubts are based in its performance in the Arkansas Derby last time. Let's take a look at that third place finish. And personally, I didn't like this effort that much. I thought he got a pretty good trip stalking Caddo River, who is another horse that probably doesn't want to go the mile and an eighth distance. And it looked like Concert Tour was going to take over at the top of the stretch and race on to victory. And you can see in the final eighth mile here, he just kind of ties up under Joel Rosario. He's asking for his best, and Super Stock runs right over the top of him. He can't even hold on for second as he allows Caddo River to come back on his inside and nip him for the runner-up spot, barely holding on for third here over a horse that's inferior. And we saw what Superstock came back to do in the Kentucky Derby. Not that much. So I have questions about the overall quality of that Arkansas Derby. And looking back at the race that got so much buzz around this horse, the Rebel two-back, well, the horses that finished behind him in that race have not really distinguished themselves since. Both Hosier came back to do poorly in the subsequent start. We haven't seen too much running from those that were behind him in that Rebel. So I have my doubts about Concert Tour. Never really got the impression he was a true classic distance horse. So if he's going to be forwardly placed, and if they're trying to apply some pressure to Medina Spirit in the early going, I just think Medina Spirit's likely to turn him away. And I don't see Concert Tour being particularly effective in this race. And if he is as short a price as he's listed on the morning line, 5-2, I want no part of this horse. Let's move on to some other horses, ones that are coming out of the Kentucky Derby that finished behind Medina Spirit. And one of those is Midnight Bourbon, who is the third horse that's listed at single digits on the morning line. I just didn't think he got the right trip in the Kentucky Derby. Mike Smith was on him for the first time in that race, and I don't know what the game plan was with the connections beforehand. I imagine it was not the trip that Mike Smith executed on this horse, but he broke a little bit awkwardly, was bumped a bit at the start, but Mike Smith just showed no aggression thereafter, allowed him to settle towards the back of the pack. That's not this horse's running style. If you look at his prior races from the fairgrounds, he's always up, involved in the pace in the early part of his races. He is a kind of a fighter, kind of like Medina Spirit. He likes to be there the entire race, prominent throughout, and he just was never in the mix in the Kentucky Derby. And when they came to the top of the stretch, it was like Mike Smith was showing no urgency to get this horse involved in the race. And he finally started to ask him once they got into the lane, but he just had too much ground to make up. He actually was closing a little bit at the end, but just couldn't get involved. So I just feel like the Kentucky Derby, we didn't get to see the true version of Midnight Bourbon there, but he's proven they can handle the distance. He did so in the Louisiana Derby two-back, and we saw in the Kentucky Derby how strong that Louisiana Derby turned out to be, with Hot Rod Charlie coming back to finish third. Mandaloon, who was off the board in the Louisiana Derby, improved a great deal in the Kentucky Derby to be second, and even Obesos came out of the third place finish in that race to be a very good fifth in the Kentucky Derby. So I think we've got some validation that the fairgrounds form was really strong this winter. Now Midnight Bourbon is getting a rider switch to Irad Ortiz, and I imagine a big part of that switch has to do with Steve Asmussen wanting this horse to be much more involved in the early portions of this race. And given the fact that there's not a whole lot of speed signed on, I think he's going to get that trip that the pace projector indicated, just in behind those two Bob Baffert runners, likely to get first run on them. And I just think Midnight Bourbon makes a lot of sense in this race. Sure, he's probably got to run a career best speed figure to beat Medina Spirit, but I think that's possible for him to do so. So Midnight Bourbon just seems like a very sensible selection in this Preakness Stakes. Moving on to another horse that's coming out of the Kentucky Derby, that is the number 2, Keep Me in Mind. Now, this horse didn't finish that far behind Midnight Bourbon in 7th place, whereas that runner was 6th, about a half length behind him. But still, while this horse was closing at the end from 19th place, I didn't think he did that much running. He did have a little bit of trouble at the start, but remember, Keep Me in Mind is a deep closer, so he always figured to be at the back of the pack of the Kentucky Derby, and he was running on at the end. But even though Medina Spirit wired the field, the Derby was a race that featured not as paced. You do see one of those red color-coded pace figures in the TimeformUS PPs, and Keep Me in Mind was picking up pieces, but I never thought he was a real threat, and he figures to get a similar trip in this Preakness, but it's not a race that features nearly as much pace as the Kentucky Derby did, so he'd have to improve, and personally, I was not a fan of his form coming into the Derby, so I wanted to look elsewhere in this race for horses to use underneath. Now, some of the new shooters that are coming in that did not compete in the Kentucky Derby, 2 of them are from the Chad Brown stable, and one of those is the number 4, Crowded Trade. Now, this is a horse that some people might say has a very similar profile to Chad Brown's Preakness winner from 2017, Cloud Computing, because just like Crowded Trade, Cloud Computing was second in the Gotham, third in the Wood Memorial, skipped the Kentucky Derby to point for the Preakness. We'll see if Crowded Trade turns out to be that same kind of horse. Let's take a look at his runner-up finish in the Gotham 2-back when he lost by just a nose to Waybird. And this was the best race that Crowded Trade has run up until this point. He got a pretty good trip. He wasn't away all that alertly, but he got into the race on the backstretch. Basically looked like he was going to take it over in mid-stretch here, but Waybird, who battles back on the inside, is just able to nip him at the finish. This was going a 1-turn mile, and Crowded Trade from here did stretch out to the 2 turns in the Wood Memorial last time. I thought he ran fine in the Wood Memorial, but some negative things that I saw from him were, once again, he broke slowly, and that's been a theme with this horse. He's broken slowly in all 3 career starts, and I don't think he can do that again in the Preakness and be successful. And also, he made a menacing move at the top of the stretch, like he was going to have a real say on the outcome of that race, and he just kind of hung in the late stages. Perhaps that was the fact that it was his first 2-turn start, might have just had some inexperience to overcome. Potentially, he's able to take a step forward here on the Preakness. He does have a pedigree that suggests a mile and 3/16 is not supposed to be a big problem because his dam was able to go route distances on the dirt. I'm just a little skeptical that he's going to be good enough, but of the 2 Chad Brown runners, I do think he's the one with the most upside. The other Chad Brown trained entrant in this race is the number 9, Risk Taking, and he was actually the favorite in the Wood Memorial last time, the race where Crowded Trade was 3rd. He only managed to finish 7th, though, in that race, just put in a poor effort that day, but Risk Taking had run much better in his prior start in the Grade 3 Withers back in February. Let's take a look at that race where he won by nearly 4 lengths, and this was a visually impressive score. He had broken his maiden just prior to this with blinkers on for the first time, and he improved coming out of that race to run the best race of his career in this Withers. He put Eric Cancel, who was riding him this day, in the game early in the race, made a good move to take over at the top of the stretch, and he's going to finish off this race going the 1 1/8 distance like a horse who's going to relish extra ground, and he does get a bit of extra ground here in this Preakness Stakes. The problem is, what happened in the Wood Memorial last time? And also, do you want horses out of the Wood Memorial in general? Because we didn't see too many horses coming from the Wood be successful in the Kentucky Derby, and it was just a really slow race. Risk Taking is reportedly training well coming into this race. That's why Chad Brown elected to scratch out of last week's Peter Pan at Belmont to instead target this more ambitious spot. But Risk Taking is just the kind of horse that does travel really well in his workouts, travels really well early in his races. The question for him is, when push comes to shove, does he have that extra oomph to carry him past some better horses in a more ambitious test? I'm not sure that he does, and I think Crowded Trade is the horse with more upside from the Chad Brown stable. A couple other horses that you might want to consider is number one of those is the 6 Rombauer. He is coming out of a 3rd place finish in the Bluegrass Stakes behind Essential Quality, who was the favorite in the Kentucky Derby, but checked in 4th in that race. I've personally never been the biggest fan of Rombauer. I thought he got a very good trip against a weaker field when he collected that Grade 1 placing as a 2-year-old at the American Pharoah. He ran fine in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Personally, I was not thrilled with his effort when he won the El Camino Real Derby. I thought that was a weaker field. And while he did finish 3rd in the Bluegrass last time, he got a perfect trip in that race, stalking, saving ground on the rail the entire way. He was running on at the end, and he's the kind of horse that does figure to appreciate the 1 3/16 distance. I just haven't seen enough from him to suggest that he's ready to take the kind of step forward that he would need to be successful in this Preakness Stakes. One more horse that could be a bomb in this race that I find somewhat interesting is the number 7 Francegodeena. This is the shipper from Japan, actually coming over from the United Arab Emirates. That's where he had to prep for this race in the UAE Derby last time. He was only managed to finish 6th in that race, actually bet down to favorite, I think, in the American markets. Joel Rosario rode him that day, and he's going to stay aboard here. Now, while he only managed to finish 6th behind the impressive winner of that race, Rebels Romance, Francegodeena did not get the right trip in that UAE Derby. He broke slowly, was way behind the field early, tried to advance in traffic on the inside on the backstretch of that race, and that's always a tough trip at Maydam, where the kickback can be really detrimental to horses that are trying to close inside of runners. He actually was traveling really well coming around the far turn and looked like he might be in the midst of running a big race before he kind of had to alter course and lose momentum at the top of the stretch and ultimately shut down from there and couldn't finish off the race. But this is a horse that was highly regarded coming into that start, coming from Japan. He had won a couple of races going the 1 1/8 distance, albeit against weaker company as a 2-year-old at Hanshin Racecourse in Japan. So I'm not sure what kind of quality he possesses coming into this Preakness, but he's going to be a big price. He has one of the best riders in the country in Joel Rosario aboard, and I'm just not thrilled with any of the new shooters in this race, and he's likely to be a bigger price than all of them. So I'm not advocating to bet him to win in this race by any means, but he's one that I would use on some exotic tickets underneath. So let's throw out my top picks for this Preakness Stakes. As I kind of alluded to when I was going through the main contenders, I am picking the number 5 Midnight Bourbon, who I just think is a horse that makes a lot of sense in this Preakness. Didn't get the right trip or ride in the Kentucky Derby. I think he's likely to rebound, and we saw that Louisiana form from the fairgrounds this winter has been really strong. Again, I've got nothing against Medina Spirit from a handicapping perspective. I think he's the most likely winner of this race, and he does make a lot of sense. Figures to work out another good trip. Just after getting 12-1 on him last time, I don't need to bet him as the favorite in this Preakness. So I put him second. I'd use Crowded Trade underneath as a distant backup, the number 7 Francegodeena to inject some value underneath. But it's Midnight Bourbon, the number 5 for me in the Preakness Stakes on Saturday at Pimlico.